What's happening, fight folk? It's your boy Jack Slack, Fights Gone By podcast episode 127. Coming at you on Thursday, not Friday this week, because people asked for Thursday, so I am delivering. The 21st of March. And we've got a weird little event coming up this weekend. We've got a Bellator event, actually, which is about even in quality. Well, you know, as much as Bellator can be. I mean, they don't really have good fights spread over the undercard and the main card, whereas this UFC event's a little bit weird and got some good fights on the undercard and a couple on the main card that you might care about. But, you know, it's, well, we'll get into it in a minute. But before we, kick off on the previews, some really interesting news happened. So, TJ Dillashaw was flagged for an abnormality in his tests by USADA. Was promptly suspended by whoever it was, the commission where he fought Cejudo. Immediately relinquished the title, which fair play to him, because consider how easily most of these guys get off with a tainted supplement story if they've got a good manager and they're important enough. He could have held on to that and denied it back and forth. The fact that he relinquished it is quite interesting because, you know, that division was becoming a log-jammed mess to begin with. Of course, it is positive PR and damage control to an extent, but I appreciate that nonetheless. That division was getting silly with TJ going down and then getting knocked out by the Flyweight champion and Marlon Moraes having to fight everyone. And Rafael Assunção never getting his shot either, and really just everyone the UFC waiting on Dominic Cruz to get healthy again so they can springboard him immediately into a title fight. But yeah, lots of people have been talking about it for a while. You know, he's one of those ones that a lot of people suspected he was using something. You know, it's not come out that he could get off with a tainted supplement. It could actually be a tainted supplement. We don't know at the moment, but it is hilarious because I called it. I said Cody Garbrandt will come out and say, I told you this guy taught us how to cheat, because he famously said TJ's on steroids. Before their first fight, he said he's on steroids at a press conference. And TJ goes, yeah, sure, I'm on steroids. And Cody goes, yeah, because you taught us all how to do it. And all the press in the room just went silent and no one followed up, which was really sad because it would have been hilarious just to watch them squirm for an hour or two. I mean, if you have a realistic assessment of drugs in this sport, you know they're around and they're part of what makes the sport good, to be honest. Injury rates went through the roof, or rather dropout rates went through the roof almost immediately after USADA really came into effect. But, we ask you not to get caught. That's the thing. Take as many drugs as you want, but don't get caught. I don't know if we touched on the fact that Paulo Costa got caught taking drugs the other day, and Yoel Romero got high and mighty about it. You're like, Yoel, we all know. Just stop. But anyway, this puts everything in a really interesting position because, as you will recall, my theory on the future of the Flyweight division was that they were going to bump Cejudo into this bantamweight title fight and then cut the Flyweight division after that title fight. I mean, what have they really invested in that division in the last year or so? They bought a new belt, but really you only have to repurpose a Quality Street tin to do that anyway. So saved a little bit of money there, and then cut most of the flyweights. I think we're going to talk about this today, but I think Figueiredo versus Formiga is the fight to save the flyweight division, depending on how that goes. But now you've got Henry Cejudo saying that he wants the bantamweight title, or to fight for whoever, with whoever they have for the bantamweight title decider now. You've got Marlon Moraes saying he wants to fight. You've got Cody Garbrandt and Peter Yan both saying they want to fight. So yeah, it puts the division in an interesting place, but it really just showed you how log-jammed the top end of that division was getting anyway. I don't think Cody Garbrandt should be allowed anywhere near back near that title. Make Garbrandt Cruz 2 for a non-title fight, for a main event somewhere, and we'll watch that again and see if Cody Garbrandt has literally forgotten everything about how to fight. Moraes versus Cejudo would be a fair fight to make, I think, for that, because Moraes is the by rights #1 contender at bantamweight, and Cejudo is in the interesting position that he's beaten Dillashaw, albeit at flyweight, and hasn't actually done anything at bantamweight. But we'll soon find out, I'm sure. Other interesting news. Rafael dos Anjos versus Kevin Lee for UFC Rochester. I forget where it is, but that's a good fight. I assume at lightweight, so RDA is coming back down, which probably should have been the lesson that he took away from the Kamaru Usman fight. and maybe the Colby Covington fight to a degree, but even against Robbie Lawler in that fight that he won, he looked much smaller. Much smaller against Lawler. There you go, I've taken a break from writing, but my poetry is as sharp as ever. And then Holly Holm re-signed a 6-fight deal with the UFC, which is basically fight into retirement with how... Well, does she fight? I think she fights like twice a year. So, yeah, interesting. She's in an interesting position because she divorced her husband, or is divorcing her husband, and only a couple of years ago when she won the belt, she was like, I've only got a couple of fights left because then I want to retire and have a baby. But she's, coming up on 40 now and doesn't have her husband anymore. So weird how plans change. Not accusing her of, flaking on her plans there. Obviously, you divorce someone because of other bigger issues. But just interesting how much more female athletes have to plan that sort of stuff into their career path. Anyway, let's talk about these fights coming up this weekend. I'm going to slag off a few of them, obviously, because it's not a very strong card. But there's some interesting stuff on here. If you haven't watched the Filthy Casuals Guide to Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, watch it, please, and share it, because I'm trying to get more eyes on the channel, and I'm trying to do more of the stuff that people like. And anyone you can share it with, or force them to sit down, or get the iPad out in the gym and just shove it in their face. Very good for me if you can do that. But yeah, so in that we basically covered Stephen Thompson's style in a nutshell. Missed out a lot of it, obviously, because it was only like a 5-minute video. But he's in the main event against Anthony Showtime Pettis, which was a fight. I feel like they announced it about 3 weeks ago, and even then I was like, what? What is going on? Why is lightweight Anthony Pettis, who went down to featherweight because he thought that would revitalise his career, now going up to welterweight? I feel like the Heavy Hands boys were right about this when they said it's a fight where the UFC wants some gifts out of it. It feels like they're feeding up Stephen Thompson so that he can go into title fight against Kamaru Usman, which is a much better matchup for him than Tyron Woodley with his weird mercurial stand on the fence style. Because Stephen Thompson is not good pressuring people or battering people along the fence. Stephen Thompson is good when you come towards him and eat his kicks and punches in your face. And Kamaru Usman is a guy who's always going to come towards you. And who hasn't fought anyone who really has the footwork of Stephen Thompson along the fence to stay off the fence. So yeah, that would be an awesome matchup. But he does have to get through Anthony Pettis first. The thing about Pettis is that he's so hit and miss lately. And I say lately, in like the last 5 years. Ever since that RDA fight, where it came out that if you put him against the fence, he's just broken by pressure. He's been completely out of sorts, and it's not just the pressure. He had like a pure kickboxing match against Edson Barbosa and got beaten up. Dustin Poirier went into a ground battle with him and beat him up there, and also did some nice work along the fence. To be fair, Tony Ferguson put the pressure on him and beat him up there. His wins are Michael Chiesa, which is legit, but Jim Miller, in this day and age, I mean, the one that really was impressive was Charles Oliveira, but that was a really weird fight. He kept giving up his back and then doing an escape back into Oliveira's closed guard. I have never seen a fight like that. If you haven't seen it, go watch it, because it's just so strange. Anthony Pettis has really good jiu-jitsu. In fact, most of his success in recent years has come through his jiu-jitsu, not his striking. But in ways that it shouldn't. He armbarred Benson Henderson, and he armbarred or triangle armbarred Michael Chiesa. Things that shouldn't be working at this sort of level, and he's doing them. And he was doing them when he was a blue belt too, or a purple belt or whatever, which is crazy. I mean, that fight with Jim Miller was sort of the best of Pettis, what you want to see from him. He's at his best when he's got the opponent with their back to the fence and he's threatening the body kick, or he can step in with the knee, or he can run up the fence and do some crazy shit. He used to be very good when he got the opponent on the fence, like the Donald Cerrone fight, just battered him on the fence. But he's not really a pressure fighter either. Like, he's okay at getting people to the fence, but he's not Rafael Dos Anjos or young Takanori Gomi. Plus, he realised that, like, despite Duke Rufus being quite famous for... Well, no, I mean, if you watched his kickboxing... well, they weren't DVDs, they were like VHSs back in the day. All about the combinations and countering into combinations and keystone punches to set up combinations. And then his number one protege, Anthony Pettis, and Sergio Pettis, throw almost no combinations in excess of 2 strikes. So he's a weird old striker, really. I mean, he's just looking to sharpshoot with the open side body kick and the open side head kick if you get lazy or you get overcommitting on the tucking your elbow into your body. He does some cool spinning shit. He does the old albatado, the cartwheel kick. Oh, Tenshin Nasukawa scored an actual cartwheel kick knockout not cartwheel kick, but the one where you go up on one hand the other day. Wasn't quite as cool as Saenz Shai's, which comes like overhead, but it was cool nonetheless. Throwing out a bone for the weebs there. When you look at Pettis' record, you go, oh, okay, no, he did win that fight, and he did win that fight, and you're going, Jim Miller, fair enough. I remember him looking good in that fight. Michael Chiesa was on a good form at the time, and that's a significant win. But you're also going, oh, Max Holloway battered him, Dustin Poirier battered him, Tony Ferguson battered him, Edson Barboza battered him. Eddie Alvarez is the only one who didn't really batter him between, in his losses between 2015 and now. If he loses big. Plus, he broke his hand in the Ferguson fight, and I think he broke his hand in the Poirier fight, didn't he? Oh no, he lost by rib injury too. So he's kind of fragile. For a fighter on this level. Yeah, and I think he broke a rib early in the Rafael dos Anjos fight too, didn't he? So all of those things really not helping your opinion of him against welterweight top contender Stephen Thompson. I mean, maybe the speed comes into play, but Stephen Thompson's footwork is so good, and he fights from such an extended distance that you still have to move more than you would have to normally to get to him. And if he keeps that lead leg in front of him all the time, he's always got that stopping kick, which again we talked about in the Filthy Casuals guide. That Bill Wallace Holy Trinity, side kick, hook kick, round kick. Wallace always came out of a high chamber, but Thompson tends to come from a low stance, just picking it straight up. Thompson's always looking for that open side angle, but he also does great pull counters. If you saw the first Woodley fight, he did wonderful work with pull counters and check hooks. It was really unusual to see him like boxing people up. And then against Jorge Masvidal, he did really good work in combination and on the counter in that fight. And it wasn't always like slide away and throw one punch in a counter. He was throwing like combinations on the counter and keeping Masvidal's hands locked to his head, which has been a Masvidal problem since the Melendez fight. If you gave Pettis an edge in this fight, you'd say, okay, he's got really good jiu-jitsu. And, his conditioning will probably be good because he won't be cutting a ton of weight to get down to lightweight or even featherweight. And he'll probably be able to take a shot better. He'll have a bit more padding on the midsection to take body shots and things like that. He might not be as fragile as if he was cutting a load of weight. But to get to his area of where we reckon he'd probably be better than Thompson, the jiu-jitsu, he has to take Thompson down. And Thompson's takedown defense, even when he's caught against the fence, is pretty bloody good. If you saw him against, Ellenberger is a decent example, but Johnny Hendricks, and the other hard part is actually getting him to the fence. He's brilliant at keeping his stance, and the moment he feels he's too close to the fence, he abandons his stance and side skips, or he steps straight out of his stance into like a classical side step, and he makes lateral movement very, very quickly, and he'll feint both ways too. He's one of him and Holly Holm, and I can count on one hand the number of guys in MMA who really have a good grasp of where they are in the cage. A lot easier in the ring, to be honest, because you've got a nice square, and it's not black. The ropes are a colour that you can see, and you can see the opposite ropes and gauge your distance from them by that. It's a little bit harder in a much bigger cage when the barriers are see-through. So, yeah, but that is an area that everyone can afford to improve on, just a cage awareness. But, yeah, no, I just can't see Pettis getting him down. Maybe they end up in a scrambly ground fight, but this seems like a fight set up for Stephen Thompson to win, and win handily. Could end up quite boring, though. Could end up with Pettis unable to reach him, and him just sort of picking and not really committing, because Pettis could always body kick him or something like that, or throw an overhead cartwheel kick. What we hope is that someone lands a Shining Wizard or some kind of spinny shit, and we get a nice few gifts out of it. I'm just saying, maybe don't expect Ricochet versus Will Ospreay. Just temper those thoughts, and maybe it'll turn out amazing. I feel like I devoted too much time to that fight, but the rest of this card's not great either. Curtis Blades is back, and he's fighting Justin Willis. Blades, obviously, like the hot prospect at heavyweight until he had that rematch with Ngannou, and he just looked... I mean, his striking's bad, but it looked so bad against Ngannou. It was like, I'm going to jab, and then run face first after the takedown. Now I'm going to jab again. And Ngannou timed his jab and fired the right hand over the top in about 30 seconds, where in the first fight he was having hella trouble. I can't believe I just said hella. So, where in the first fight he was having tons of trouble with the jab, even though Blades doesn't have a good jab. Or rather, Blades doesn't have good movement after the jab, or good movement before the jab, or any way to mix up your expectation of when the jab's coming. The jab itself was alright. But he's fighting Justin Willis, who you'll remember from decisioning Mark Hunt in front of his home crowd in his retirement fight, and then getting into a scrap with Tyron Woodley at the weigh-ins for the same card. Jesus Christ, Tapology has him number 11 current heavyweight MMA fighter in the world. God help us. This fight will probably be shit, if I'm honest, but you might get a stoppage. John Makdessi versus Jesus Pineda, who's from Peru. Oh my God, we're back on the Valentina Shevchenko knockout tour, the Peruvian circuit. Why is he coming in as well? Tapology here says 170th at lightweight in the world against a top 40 lightweight in John Makdessi. Probably because they want Makdessi to get a knockout win. But Makdessi's in a weird spot because he's good, but when you see him against the top guys, he just gets brutalized. Not really fair to include that Lando Venata one because it happened so quickly. You didn't get to see it wouldn't be fair to say that his skill is much below Venata when he got caught with a wheel kick in the first round. If he'd gone the full first round and got blown out and then wheel kicked, we go, okay, well, he's clearly levels below. But that Venata loss was in 2016. That was December 2016. He fought Abel Trujillo and won since, and Ross Pearson and won. Oh, my boy Ross. Since. So yeah, he's bounced back from that little 1-3 skid that he was on there. And he's always been a fun fighter to watch. He was... Back in the day, he came into the UFC and we were like, nobody's really sidekicking and nobody's really using spinning back fists and stuff. And Makdessi uses both, and he's got some interesting lead hand heavy boxing. He'll double up the jab and throw hooks in there in combination and things. There was an interesting article went up this week. I saw it on Reddit MMA. Not writing at the moment, so I can read other people's analysis. I can't remember who it was. Might have been an MMA sucker. Might have been Ryan Wagner or Wagner, but. Yeah, it was good. Go look that up. It's on Reddit. And it was about Makdessi's boxing. But Makdessi, I loved that spinning back fist he used to do where he'd step through across himself. It was like the Kung Lee special where you step through and turn into a back kick with what was the leading leg. But he did it with a back fist. If he has a career resurgence, I'll be very happy because he's a fun fighter. Maybe Jesus Pinedo surprises us, but I know nothing about him. Anyway, let's move on to the one that I'm actually wanting to talk about. Jussier Formiga versus Davison Figueiredo. This one has me kind of excited. I said it's the fight for the future of the flyweight division, and that's because if Figueiredo finishes Formiga, I imagine they'll do a flyweight title fight between him and Cejudo, which Cejudo will smoke him, by the way, in my humble opinion. I just, having rewatched all of Figueiredo's UFC fights earlier today, there's good stuff in there, but it's all sort of loose. It's not really tied together. All the things that he does well, they don't really gel very well. And there's sort of big gaps that someone like Henry Cejudo could smash his way through. And Jussier Formiga is on the opposite end of the spectrum, where we all go, I can appreciate his skill, I just don't want to watch him. To be fair, he finished Olka Sasaki and Ben Nguyen back-to-back. Well, I suppose that's a year and a bit ago, but that fight with Sergio Pettis, where he just got on Sergio Pettis' back and Sergio Pettis held his hands, nothing happened. That was pretty disappointing. He's already lost a split decision to Cejudo. It would be interesting to see that over 5 rounds, but who am I kidding? It wouldn't be interesting to see because it's Jussier Formiga. So if Jussier Formiga wins this one, expect them to shut down the flyweight division, and if Figueiredo knocks him out, expect that Cejudo title fight. But Figueiredo's interesting, really interesting, because, like I said, there's big gaps in his game. But when I was watching his UFC fights, firstly, they kept him in Brazil for a good while. They didn't really bring him to the States until his last couple of fights. But one of the interesting things is that they keep listing different things for what he is. They go, he's a kung fu fighter in his first fight, and then in his second fight he was announced as a Muay Thai and boxing fighter, and in his third fight they were like, he's a karate man. No one really knows what he does, but he's a good grappler. He's very good on the ground. And that was really noticeable in what was his worst performance, I'd say, in the UFC, which was against Jared Brooks, which is a split decision that he won, but really shouldn't have. Jared Brooks took him down, and to be fair, Jared Brooks did just camp out in full guard. It was not an active performance. He wasn't trying to do anything. He was just like, okay, I'm going to keep my elbows in and put my head in your chest and wait until we're stood up or hope that we aren't. And Figueiredo's guard looked really fun in that fight. He was pushing the head away, shrimping out, always trying to make stuff happen. He did a nice turn away into like the turtle and started standing up, and Brooks grabbed his shorts and pulled himself onto his back as they rolled through, and he got like into a crab ride position. And we were all going, oh, that was a cool position. Then Mario Yamasaki stopped it and said, you grabbed the shorts, and everyone went, no, he didn't. And then they showed the replay, and he did, and it was a really good call by Yamasaki, actually. But in that fight in particular, I saw potential of a new sort of Takanori Gomi figure, which is why I mentioned Takanori Gomi earlier. He's fresh in my mind. But he was like midway through the fight, he's walking Brooks down. He's cutting the cage on him well. Brooks is sort of panicking along the fence and shooting desperate takedowns. And Figueiredo's trying to time uppercuts, and he does well. But the thing about Figueiredo is he hits the body really well, but he does it very infrequently. And it makes differences in his fights. Hit Moraga with a wide right to the body and then went, oh, that seemed to work, and then jumped in with a left hook to the body and TKO'd him. And against, was it Morales he stopped with the uppercut? Oh no, it was Beltran, I think it was. He knocked him down near the end of the second round, but he hit him with a wide right to the body, and then he came in to do the same thing again, but threw a right uppercut instead and knocked his head back. He's very sort of like one at a time. It was Morales, he jabbed and snapped his head straight back. Like the hardest jab connection I've seen probably in the UFC in some time. The guy just walked straight onto it and got knocked down by it. But it is very much one at a time, and they very rarely like that. I think that was the first time I saw his jab. And then in the next round he was like, oh, my jab worked, I'll use the jab. That old Muhammad Ali thing. If someone tells you it's looking good, you do it more, rather than if someone asks for it, you won't do it. With the jab, he could be very dangerous. With more bodywork, he could be very dangerous. Gomi's run through that Pride lightweight Grand Prix was walking dudes down, and if they ducked in for a takedown, he threw the uppercut to the sternum, not to the head, because that's always going to be coming in at you. And he really winded dudes like that. And if they stood still along the ropes, he'd just throw a combination with a nice body shot in too. And Figueiredo hits hard, so that would be a good strategy for him. But he seems to sort of prefer like the one at a time, trying to do weird stuff and catch people unawares, rather than constant pace, constant pressure, constant bodywork. Does a nice upward elbow, does like a jab and then step in with the upward elbow. A favourite of Muay Thai coaches. Throws lots of side kicks when he feels like it and they don't really do anything. And his takedowns are good and his ground game's good. He's very good at threatening the guillotine. I don't know if he actually got any guillotine submissions. One. Yeah, only one. But, well, some of these just win and don't actually have the method. But, only one listed guillotine chokes victory. But he threatens it a lot. And he uses it to get up or to attempt to sweep. And he does it from the top. And he does... There were a couple of times I was watching his fights, because especially in that Brooks fight, he grabbed the guillotine a lot while he was getting taken down, and he just sort of ended up on his back and didn't really do anything with it. He couldn't actually sweep or anything. He's just holding on for this guillotine and trying to finish it, and it didn't. But when he's on top, he'll threaten the guillotine, and he actually doesn't fall to his back, because I was watching him do it and going, don't do that! And then he went to mount instead, and it was really nice. So he's got a good ground game. It'll be very interesting to see what he can do with someone of Formiga's level as an MMA grappler. Especially given that when Brooks stalled him out from closed guard, he eventually got up, turned his back, and then almost had his back taken. The only thing that stopped him was Mario Yamasaki calling a shorts grab, which a lot of people would have not seen. I feel like Figueiredo is a guy who has a lot of potential, and I don't know if he'll meet it, because he'll probably have this run towards a title shot and then not realise that he could have, the stuff that he should have been working on during that time. I just think he's too open, too susceptible to being taken down while swinging at people. If you don't go for basic shots and dive your head onto his uppercut, if you can work to clinches and stuff, he's got good clinch takedowns, but I don't think they're on like Cejudo's level or Demetrius Johnson. So yeah, we'll see. And I think the kicking game could also stifle him as well, because he doesn't really kick a lot. He tries to like step in and punch people. And he's quite a stocky dude. He's not shooting straight shots from long range. He's stepping in to swing at them. What else is going on? Luis Peña's Violent Bob Ross is going to featherweight, I think, featherweight for the first time. I only know that because I was watching that I Am the Bay videos. JJ Aldrich versus Macy Barber. Yeah. Oh, Marlon Vera versus Frankie Saenz. We're actually finally getting this one. Cool. And then my girl Angela Hill is on the prelims against Randa Marcus. Ooh, that's either Angela Hill getting taken down and held down, or Angela Hill boxing Marcus up. And then for sake of fairness, we'll talk about the Bellator one just briefly, because there's actually some alright stuff on this compared to like a normal Bellator card. You got Emmanuel Sanchez returning in the main event against Sergey Karakhanyan. I don't know who that is, but that's only a 3-rounder. What's that about? Valentin Moldavsky versus Linton Vassell. I like Linton Vassell. He sort of dropped off the face of the earth a little bit after losing to... who did he lose to? Was it King Mo? Oh, no, it was Bader, wasn't it? Oh, I can't remember. Fuck. Yeah, no, it was Bader and then Davis. It was 2 back-to-back finishes, which were rough. I didn't think he was bad against Davis. He's just not a great striker, to be honest. Not that Davis is, but he's not a very good striker. But he beat, Francis Carmont was a decent win. And then Liam McGeary, he just mauled. And Liam McGeary's whole thing has been being slick on the bottom, and Vassell he threatened Americanas throughout that fight, which was really cool. Then he finally arm triangled him. Very interesting performance, specifically because this guy trains with Melanson, I think, all the time. And he's from Milton Keynes, a British lad. And then you got Anatoly Tokov versus Gerald Harris, which is interesting enough. I mean, that's a middleweight fight, but Gerald Harris, he's been down to welterweight before, I'm pretty sure. Anatoly Tokov is mainly someone you sort of like half keep an eye on because he constantly billed as Fedor's protege. He's part of Fedor's team in Story-Oskal. Whenever someone says Fedor's protege, you go in expecting the next Fedor, and you're always disappointed that it's just some guy. And Anatoly Tokov is just some guy who's all right at fighting. I mean, if you watched him against Shlemenko, it was not a particularly magical performance. Just sort of the usual, trying to hit hard and then going for takedowns, and then losing control and the guy scrambles up and then you try and hit him hard again. None of the magic that made Fedor Fedor. Right, let's take a question, I think, and then we'll get out of here for this week. Hey Jack, first of all, thanks for the great articles and podcasts. You are doing the Lord's work, one filthy casual at a time. On to my question. All the time we see fighters battling on the cage, one fighter pressing into the opponent and then going for a takedown against the cage, or the opposite where the fighter uses the cage to shoot out into the open space, a la Tyron Woodley. I'm curious why we don't see a fighter subverting this, i.e. the fighter with his back to the cage throwing his opponent into open space. I'm not a judoka, but it seems to me that a lot of judo throws, such as Uchimata or Tayatoshi, for example, lend themselves well to this, especially if your opponent is pressing into you. My thought is that a savvy fighter could press his opponent against the cage, wait for a reaction, and when the opponent pushes back, then use that to throw the opponent into the open space and end up on top. For a strong grappler or BJJ player, it seems that this would have the added advantage of placing you away from the cage, thus eliminating your opponent's ability to use the cage for defense, or allowing you more room to work. Is there something I'm missing, or are there any pros and cons to this tactic, preventing it from being used more regularly? Thanks again, from Chris. Yes, spot on with the desire to get into open space. That is what you're seeing overwhelmingly now, with the a few exceptions of grindy cage guys like Kamaru Usman and Khabib Nurmagomedov, but it's such a butting of heads, that style, because you take them down along the fence, which stops them like running away, but then they have the fence to stand back up, so you're just stuck in this constant grind. Whereas, Usman's best stuff against Rafael dos Anjos was when he turned off the fence with a takedown and took Anjos down into the center of the cage a bit. You see guys like Frankie Edgar take dudes down along the fence and then pull them away from the fence out into the center of the cage, turn them around so that his butt is pointing towards the fence. But on the subject of judo throws, yeah, you used to see a few, like when guys pressed Karo Parisian into the fence, he used to hit like an Uchimata or something like that. Fedor threatened one against Brett Rogers to get off the fence. I mean, it's quite hard because the guy is, if you're pressing into the fence, it's not, a lot of that redirecting force stuff that makes good, slick, cool throws and so on, is about deflecting force off to the side of you and then following it through. That's something that Damian Maia's always on about, deflection. But if the guy's pressing straight into the fence, it's quite hard to deflect that off to the side because the side is just the fence. You see them occasionally when guys are working on a single or something like that, drop down a little bit low, you can hit a nice Uchimata there. But the cage work generally has become so detailed now, and a lot more of it is about sort of knee position stuff. DC's always talking about it, but you see guys do that thing where they get the body lock and they get a knee on the inside and they throw the dude down towards his hands. And it's like, most of the time it's not, I want to get you down on your back. It's like, if you go down on your hands and knees and try and build up again, I can shuck to your back. But you also see guys do, I don't know if there's a name for it even, but if you get a body lock on the fence and you get one leg behind the opponent's, like if you were trying to reap that leg and trip them out, which you saw Kamaru Usman do to Woodley, but then they'll bring the other knee in behind the same leg of the opponent. So you've got two knees behind one of their legs, and then you sort of like turn out. So you're sort of in a leg drag position, but standing, and you just turn them round onto the floor. And it's a sort of slow, ugly takedown, but you see guys doing it a lot, just working that knee in behind. And that sort of puts you in the position of if the opponent stepped across to try a hip throw or something, but your weight's set, and you're just bumping that leg out and trying to pull them down. And you'll see, just today I was watching the Figueiredo fight, and he does it, he sneaks that knee in, two knees behind one of the opponent's knees and starts turning them round, and then they try and turn back into him, and he just picks them up and slams them, or throws them back onto their hands the other way. The knee position stuff is getting really important in MMA nowadays, whereas it used to be like press against the fence, pummel for position, you'd each turn each other onto the fence. Like, there were fights like Manoa versus Jimmo, where the two just turned constantly along the fence. It was like, oh, it's my turn to be against the fence now. Okay, well, I can always like turn him around when he leans too heavily on me on one side. Whereas now guys are focusing much more on just where their knee position is and pushing the opponent's knees out. And when you consider that like judo as a sport, it's a little bit longer because you're working with the jacket rather than like strict clinches. And a lot of it is footwork. If you see any judoka warming up, they'll do hundreds of repetitions of just that footwork of getting in position to hit a shoulder throw or just the turning and what is it called, like irimi or something like that, the entering. And if you take away that movement, it's a lot harder to do. It's the same with like foot sweeps and things. The coolest foot sweeps in judo come when they get someone stepping just the right way and they just tap that foot out just as it's about to step. And that sort of timing is a lot harder to hit in a static clinch where that's much more of a grinding and pummeling position, whether it's pummeling with the hands or pummeling with the knees or pummeling with the head. I feel like it's the same as it is with striking. The more you smother the opponent, the less chance they have to be dynamic and explosive with their striking. That's why the clinch is such a big deal in boxing. The clinch was, every fight goes to the clinch was the whole thing with Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. But I think the same is true of a lot of judo stuff, is that if you can, not crush them, but like if you can smother them to the point where they can't move their feet and create power and create movement, you make it a much more static and grindy fight. But that's just me saying that as someone who does like fence wrestling. Right, I reckon that'll do us for this week. Sorry, it's such a boring event. That's all I can say. It's we haven't had a slow one in a while, but I think next week we've got a fun one, haven't we? We've got we've got Barbosa versus Gaethje. I've been looking forward to that since before that was even announced. I've just been dying to have that fight, so that'll be amazing. I'm going to jizz myself for an hour solid in next week's podcast, or next week's preview podcast at least. But again, we never know what's going to happen. Lack of names doesn't mean bad fights, and Anthony Pettis could come out and smoke Stephen Thompson and then be in that Jorge Masvidal position where it's like you lost a couple and really we shouldn't be this excited, but now we're all like, okay, title shot for this man. And Pettis will say, well, I'm at my real weight now, and then lose one and go, well, I'm going back down to lightweight or even featherweight. If you want to support the podcast and get the history episodes, sign up to the Patreon, which allows me to do this twice a week and also means that I have time to do things that aren't monetized, like the Filthy Casuals guides, which have been great fun and really well received. If you want to see what I'm up to at any time, check out thefightprimer.com, which has been freshly updated today. And if you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. I've been your boy Jack Slack. Cheers! What's left of the flyweight division, bless.